Well, welcome to the Cup for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns, and we're joining together on Zoom tonight. Just kind of been one of those weeks, but today we're going to dig into my message from Sunday, which was about sharing our faith or evangelism. So both Eric and I are going to share some people in our lives that kind of helped us understand what the gospel was, and then just dig into some of the excuses that we give as to why evangelism is not for us. But before we do that, Eric, I just wanted to thank you for letting Pastor Peggy come on last week. We had a great conversation, but glad to be back with you this week. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Awesome.
Between the topic and just the weekend that it was, I had a really hard time putting together the sermon. Just evangelism is such a hard topic sometimes to talk about. And like evangelicalism, because that term has become so loaded and kind of a political. Term. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I was trying to balance like how far into those weeds I wanted to dig.
Right.
Yeah. What were some of your initial thoughts, Eric, of like, because I did at the start of it, like I gave a definition of what evangelical is and what it means. And then one of the things I was proud of saying is that, with that true definition in mind, without everything else that the word has become, I am an evangelical. Like I want people to know about Jesus. But do you wish I would have gone further into the political part of it,
no.
or the baggage of that word, or did I do enough work around the baggage?
I don't think you should ever pay enough lip service to baggage, in my opinion. I mean, never pay too much attention to that. I think it's more valuable in talking about what is true about it. Just because there's a political block of people that call themselves evangelicals and all vote conservatively doesn't mean that that's actually important.
Right.
I probably fit into that category, but does that actually matter to me? Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I thought you spent the required amount of time on dismissing that.
Okay.
And saying how little, I mean, you didn't say it wasn't important, but because you spent so little time on it, it made it feel less important.
Yeah.
And I think that's the right way to handle it.
Nice. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, good job.
That was one of the questions I had about this sermon in particular, is because evangelicalism has become and like I said, it is a word that means so many things that it almost means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think that's sad, because it has, it can define who we are as Christians as a perfect way of stating that we are on this mission of making Jesus known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That really is all we are, right? Or I don't know. Popular opinion has ruined stuff in different ways, and I would say that is one of them.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, I don't know if I want to say media or pop culture or the zeitgeist of our times. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree.
No, I thought you did a really nice job.
One of the things I could have dug more into at the end of the sermon, I talked about the reasons why we don't take on evangelism. The fact that we don't think that our story is dramatic enough, or we don't know the Bible well enough, or what would I say? One of the things that I could have dug into in that instance is like, these are not new excuses. Like, these are not new reasons why people have gone out of the way or tried to get out of the way of doing what God had asked them to do. Like with the, I don't know what to say. Like, that's Moses. Like, that's Moses' story the entire time. That's one of the things that got cut while I was writing, is because I wanted to dig in to be like, Moses did not know what to say. Moses, like when God called him to go to Pharaoh and say, hey, you're going to let these Israelite people go because that's what God says you're going to do. Like, Moses didn't have those words. Those were words that God gave to Moses. And like every step of the way, when God was telling Moses what Moses was going to do, he had a good reason why he wasn't going to do those things. And every single time, God was the one to say, well, you don't think you're a good enough speaker? I will turn you into a good enough speaker. You think that the work is too big for you? Hey, here's your brother Aaron. Like, you don't think that people are going to believe you? Here's a staff that turns into a snake. Like, come on now. Stop it. Just go and do the darn thing, And just
Mm-hmm.
every step of the way, like, and that we can come up with those same excuses, but yet every single time God is going to give us what we need to do what God has asked us to do. And I just,
Well, okay. How often do you sit down to write a sermon and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do? You know what I mean? Like, how often does that happen to you? And then as you read resources or whatever, somehow that idea just kind of formulates in your brain, and then you can just start writing.
yep.
I don't know about for you, but when I do that, when you ask me to preach, I'm like, oh crap. It comes to like Wednesday, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say.
Right.
And then I've talked about this. I go on a run, and then all of a sudden, it all just comes to me. You know,
absolutely.
I'm like, that's not me.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, like I was saying at the start of this conversation, like this sermon was hard for me. And part of what was hard was just staring at a blank Word document saying, okay, what do we do with this now? You know, like, cause like, Pastor Peggy and I have been putting this sermon series together, and like, we picked these words a while back, and now it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do with this word? You know, like there's baggage around this word, and this is a really jargony word. And like, we hear this word and we think that it means just that one thing. And that bit that, evangelism is such a bigger word than we give it credit for. So like, I was really not starving for places to go, but it was just kind of a matter of like trying to decide exactly where to go to just get words on the paper. And that's why, like, I say this a lot, and I mean it every time I say it. I'm not smart enough for these things to coincide the way that they do, because like my sermon introduction could not have happened if I didn't teach confirmation last Sunday. Because that was Sunday's confirmation session. That's how we started confirmation.
That's cool.
That was that balderdash idea. And like, I was able to then say, hey, this is the definition of evangelism and the definition of evangelicalism. What's the real definition, and why do we believe these definitions that are not what that is? And it's because someone's trying to convince us of a different definition. That's balderdash. That's literally balderdash. That's the game, and so it was just kind of fortuitous that, I think that's just part of God's wisdom and not my own wisdom. Yeah. Yeah. Where the word tells us, to trust in God and lean not on our own understanding, kind of means it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things. I don't know, if things are hard to define or we can't put it in a box.
Yep.
We don't want to do it.
Yep.
This definitely feels like one of those things.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's hard to do evangelism.
Yeah.
Because you get rejected all the time.
Right.
Or you have the fear of getting rejected all the time.
Yep. Absolutely.
Not necessarily always getting rejected, but that thought creeps into your mind. You're like, well, do I waste my time doing this? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, you can tell someone as much as you want to that, like, if you do share the gospel and they do tell you no, or they do yell at you, or they do, whatever, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting God. And those are two different things, but yet it still can feel very personal because our faith is so personal to us. Like my faith means more to me than anything else in my life. And like if I were to be sharing the gospel with someone or sharing the reason why faith is so important to me, and they just tell me either no thanks or, to go suck a rock, it's hard to not take that personally. But yet,
absolutely,
yet the truth does remain that, they're and they might be rejecting you. And that hurts. I mean, that can cause the loss of relationship, or that can, people are like, oh, well, you changed or you turned into this. And it's just like, well, I didn't really turn into this. I just have found my voice for sharing the gospel. Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, when I was in high school, we had a teacher that taught sophomore English that was really big on us giving speeches. And like one of the speeches that we had to do was like a how-to speech. And I wasn't brave enough to do this, but a friend of mine in a couple of years younger than me, for his how-to speech, talked about how to accept Jesus as your savior. And
oh, wow.
Holy crap. Like people just lost their brains, man. Like And like they were so mad, and this feedback was so negative, and the teacher's like, he met the requirements of the assignment. It was a how-to
Mm-hmm.
speech. He told you how to do something. If you don't like it, that's not on me. That's not on him. That's on you. And like the way that we were able to build him up was just by saying that if people weren't hating you, your Christ light wouldn't be shining. And but again, that feels so personal and it's so hard to walk through. But like, I was just glad that young man had a community of people surrounding him and saying, "Hey, I think you're doing the right thing. You did it all the right ways, and if people don't like it, that's not you. That's more on them than it is on you." But
Right.
it was still very brave and very well done for a sophomore in high school
Mm-hmm.
presenting the
Yeah, no
gospel.
kidding.
So,
No kidding.
yep,
It's the equivalent of Stephen getting stoned.
yeah, pretty much,
You know?
yeah,
Wow.
yep.
To have the fortitude to do that, that's impressive.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what my how-to speech was about, but I darn sure remember his.
Right.
Um, and then like the other two are that I don't know enough about the Bible, and then that my story isn't dramatic enough to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are all excuses that we say. Like especially the one about the dramatic story. Like I know that in my history I have said those words. Those words have literally been said out of my mouth. And I thought I was off the hook for evangelism forever because my story just has nothing to it.
Right. I've definitely felt that way.
Yeah. Yep. Because like when I was in college, when I was at USF, the big story that everyone kind of knew because he was a part of Lifelight Ministries for a while was Brian Head Welch. He was the lead singer of Korn and like talks about like doing meth and like smoking cocaine and doing other drugs. But then like he woke up one day and like watched his daughter watching one of his music videos and said, yeah, I need to reevaluate my life choices. Like, that's evangelism. Like in my stupid college brain, I was like, no, that's evangelism. Like that's what that looks like. That's what evangelism looks like. I don't have anything like that,
Right.
And then it wasn't really even until I got to seminary when I had a professor named Dr. Gary Strickland who came to faith like you and like me as he was sharing his faith story with us. When it's very boring, it's like all of us. He's a PK and just very gradually came into faith. He's like, well, some people cross over into salvation at the narrow part of the river. Others, the river's a little bit high, a little bit wider. But sometimes, he said, sometimes the miracle is what God saved us from in the first place, not what God pulled us out of. And that always is something that has resonated with me a lot because my story is not very exciting at all, but yet there's not a lot of people that have that big dramatic story. And so stories that are more, I don't know what the word quite is. I don't want to say normal, but a little quieter. That's going to be more of your norm than those larger stories get the publicity and they get the public eye. But there is still power in those more tame stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's more often than not what people are going to experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's even like the Tim Tebow story. Everyone butchers him for expressing his faith all the time. And I'm like, good for him.
Yeah.
He's one who, I think his faith story is as boring as ours.
Yep.
Just grew up in the church and that's just, what you do. And
yep.
He's willing to use the platform that he has to share that with others. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
He may be a tool a little bit. I don't know.
Right. A little bit.
But good for him. Like he's not afraid.
No, not at all.
Yeah. I just think that's so cool.
And
it's always cool. Like when you go to, like when I've gone to Vikings games in the past, there's always a large contingent of both teams who gather at the center of the field after the game to pray. Just that alone can be such a powerful message to people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That these world-class athletes who are making millions of dollars have the same faith that you and I do. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I think that's so cool.
Yep. the same faith and the same priorities. And like, not that they're using that as a springboard to proclaim the message, but yet they are still telling the story that their faith matters to them by taking the time to do that. Yeah, I think that's huge. I think it's so important. Yeah, to notice so cool. That. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, when back when I was in Burke, our first football game after the tornado in 2019 was against against Sunshine Bible Academy. Like that, I mean, they were going to stop and pray anyway, but like they like both teams full on huddle in the middle of the field praying. You know, that was such a powerful moment to know that our community had been through just so much. Like we had to move the game to the middle of the afternoon because we lost the lights on our football field. Yeah, we just been through it, and to know that they were praying for us and going to be and willing to pray with us was just huge. That was so powerful. The other way we try to get ourselves off the hook is by saying we just don't know enough about the Bible, which is a fixable situation. You know, like we can always learn more. I mean, we talked a couple weeks ago about, you know, when we were talking about the sources of theology and the sources of learning theology. You know, we can pick up a study Bible. We can pick up a basic intro. Like there's a lot of great one volume, like one book introductions to the Bible, like that are just solid. They're just solid books, solid resources. Like we can learn more if we want to. If we I mean, that's kind of on us, you know. But also, I think, like I said on Sunday, I think there's an aspect where like the disciples didn't fully know the word either. Like they would have had, I mean, they would have had some learning from their time in Hebrew school. They would have known what they picked up from the synagogues and at the temple, but like they didn't. I mean, there wasn't just Bibles around there. There wasn't just what we call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. Like they wouldn't have known either, but yet that never stops them from sharing their faith.
And for them, they don't have nearly the opportunities that we did because everything they would have gotten was secondhand.
Yes.
You know, people telling them and not having the opportunity to actually read it for themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, of the Old Testament.
Yep.
They got to witness the whole Jesus thing, so that's different.
Right, yeah. But yeah, they got to witness the whole Jesus thing, and then they wrote a lot of the Bible. You know, like, you know, not the Gospels there are, if, you know, depending on which Johns and which Matthews, but like those are the works of the disciples. And then, like, you know, there are other Gospels that were written that were not accepted as biblical canon, but yet are still documents that exist, not have had a firm grasp on the word. And yet they were still able to share their faith, and they were still able to, the early church was able to devote itself to the apostles' teaching. That was their work. Yeah. So one of the thoughts that I had, Eric, and this might be, because I know your faith background, and because you know my faith background, it might be an interesting conversation. Who would you say is someone that evangelized to you? Like, who is someone that really shared their faith with you in a way that made it make sense for you?
Well, my faith background is essentially the same as yours. Grew up in this church.
Yeah.
You know, and went to Ponce and went to Lake and Storm Mountain, and it's just what you did, right?
Yep.
You know, and so my family, 90% of the Stearnses are all still Methodist, I would say. We've never shared it verbally. It's just not something we really talk about, but it's blatantly obvious what we believe, if that makes sense. And so I don't know if there's one particular person, but just growing up in that situation, or growing up in that type of a family, yeah, it's just what you did. And if I can watch my grandparents and be like, that's who I want to be, I'm going to go doing what they do. Or watch my parents and be like, that's who I want to be, I'm going to go do what they do. And one of those, and their faith is important, is the most important thing to them. And so
definitely
that's what I want to do.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know if there was one person who told me a story, you know, told me their faith story that made a huge difference in my life. But it's that great cloud of witnesses that go before us, right? In Hebrews.
Yep, totally.
I have that in my family. So
Nice.
yeah. Did you have a particular person?
I mean, kind of the same as you. I mean, just watching my family and just, because faith is very important to a big chunk of my family. Like just growing up and being a part of the church was very important to my folks. And my grandparents as well. My grandma Doris was a huge, like, she had a Bible study group that she met with every week, and they went, like, outside of Bible study, they had breakfast together every Saturday morning, and like you just knew that it was so important to her, and that it was just such a huge part of her life. And then my aunt Nedra was also really big in serving her church. Like, she was a one woman hospitality crew. Like, she would take vacation and come to Gregory. And like, she would spend at least half of her day writing cards to people back in Frankfurt that are a part of her church. And when she wrote a card, it was like the inside, the other inside where the writing where the words are what were supposed to be, and then the back. And then sometimes it was like an extra sheet of paper, or maybe even 2 extra sheets of paper. But like, I loved that as her nephew, but like, that was for everybody,
That's cool.
Yeah. So just that, watching that part of her faith was important to me as well. But like, in terms of like pastors and stuff, one of the ones that comes to mind for me always is Pastor Bob Simmons. He served the Gregory Church when I was in later elementary, middle school, and then into high school. He was in Gregory for 7 years, and I don't think I ever had a conversation with him where he didn't tell me that I was a walking, talking miracle made in God's image. And like, that has so, like, it felt cheesy then, but now that I'm older and can really appreciate it, that is definitely a phrase that sticks with me, that I'm a walking, talking miracle made in God's image. And I can tell,
that's really cool.
I can hear him say it as I say those words. And so then I also had a camp counselor when I was at Ponset. He was a football player for Dakota Wesleyan. His name was Craig Evanson. And he was so funny and so cool and loved Jesus. And like, he's the guy that I always wanted to be like when I was a kid. And just, and like the way that he was willing, like, because I'm an elder millennial, we had MSN Messenger. And like, he was willing to add me on MSN Messenger, and we would talk, like, even outside of camp and stuff, we would be able to talk to each other. And I was going through a hard thing, and he'd be like, "Hey, I'm here, and whatever you need," and just kind of, yeah. And just, it was never explicitly stated, but you knew it was inspired by his faith. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, sir.
Yeah.
What's next week?
Yeah, so next week we are going to be peeling into a really, really juicy theological term. I was talking about it, or I gave Sarah the bulletin today to get the bulletin ready to go, and she's like, "You're going to have to help me because I can't even pronounce this one." And I was like, "Oh, it's the word soteriology." So we're back into an ology word. Yeah, it's it's a good, juicy theological word. It's a 25-cent seminary word. But soteriology is about salvation, the study of salvation. How is it that salvation happens? And so we're going to be kind of like, how I'm starting the sermon on Sunday is by, like, it's under the umbrella of grace. It's under that. It's another layer of that grace story. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I say in prayer, "I give you thanks for the gift of grace, O God, and everything that grace means to us." Like, this is under that big umbrella of what grace means to us, is what salvation is. And like, the work that goes into, like, the work that goes into salvation, which is God's work and not ours. And so we're going to be digging into what salvation is and looks like, and how we experience it, and why is it important that we experience it. But we're going to be focusing on salvation on Sunday.
I like it.
Yep. Yeah, it should be good.
Well, thanks for joining us on this week's Cup for Time podcast. Join us again next week in person in the church at 10 a.m., online, or for the podcast next week.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.